to Safe Inside, brought to you by TheraTribe. I'm Jeremy Loomis, and these are my conversations with Sandra Fields, an LPC and certified clinical trauma treatment provider with over 35 years' experience helping people who have been through trauma. Welcome back to Safe Inside, the TheraTribe podcast. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Sandy.
We're going to talk today about the impact of trauma. Sandy, you want to introduce today's guest?
I do. Today we've got MJ. MJ is a trauma survivor who has spent some time going through therapy, and she's here today to talk about the impact of trauma and her trauma responses on her life. So hi, MJ.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We're so glad you're here this morning. So it takes a lot of courage to show up for a podcast, especially one on trauma.
Yeah.
So good job.
And you're our first guest on this show, so we appreciate that as well.
Okay. Guinea pig.
Very first Safe Inside guest. Yay, MJ.
Yay.
Yay. Well, MJ, we were wondering about some of the normal trauma responses that you may currently experience at times. If you were to name the top 2 or 3, what do you think that they might be?
I would say a lot of minimizing and a lot of dissociation as well.
Okay, let's talk about that.
I would say those are mine.
Let's talk about that minimization for a moment. How does that show up for you? What does that look like in your life?
So it looks like minimizing a lot of my emotions. So I don't have a wide breadth of emotions that I feel. It also looks like minimizing if people treat me poorly, I will brush that off very nonchalantly. And I think it also looks like minimizing myself and my self-worth and, my purpose or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that when you're trying to break out of that? What does that look like? Can you tell our listeners what some of the things that you use to help that?
So that's a hard one. Trying to remember to be in the moment, I think, is like if I am experiencing some happiness or joy, just trying to take that in. Also realizing that it's okay for me to be angry. I don't feel a lot of anger. And so trying to step in that and let myself feel all of those emotions. Here recently, as far as minimizing myself, I've started to be able to set boundaries with multiple different people on a professional level as well as the personal level. So I think I've improved in both of those ways.
And if I could ask, MJ, you're talking about learning to be more present. And I know with a lot of things, the self-help industry is enormous, but there's so many things that might be good tips and good advice out there that sort of tell you the what without telling you the how. And I wonder what your process has looked like in terms of finding what works for you to actually be in the moment.
So I think for me, I'm still in the recognizing phase, just being cognizant that I'm thinking about the past, I'm thinking about the future, and that I'm not really taking in my surroundings and accepting the moment for what it is. So I think I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to point out that many people who have experienced trauma as children do find expressing emotions or even feeling emotions, it feels unsafe. And so their emotional range really narrows. their tolerance for feeling emotion becomes very, very narrow. And so they may or may not feel very happy or very, very sad even. It may just be more of a flat line or sort of apathetic about life. It's hard to go one way or the other. And anger, you mentioned anger, MJ, that's one of those ones that, you know, we certainly, it is okay to feel anger. And sometimes we ought to feel anger or outrage because it helps us set boundaries. Anger is not a negative emotion. It's just, it is an emotion. That's actually a signpost that something's not right in our lives. And many people that have experienced trauma have trouble expressing that because anger is one of those emotions that was not allowed or was not acceptable within that trauma environment or traumatic environment, I guess would be the word. So good job for you. Yeah, thank you for recognizing those things, right?
On the heels of that, on the heels of that, I am curious about, you know, if that speaks for your experience and anger was sort of not allowed, what does the process look like to start reintegrating emotions? And I was specifically wondering if there's been a lot of fear of rejection from friends and peers.
Absolutely.
Like if I show emotions, I'm going to be unacceptable to the people that do already accept me.
And I think there's this fear of exposure. Like I'm going to expose my true self and that's not going to be accepted. So it's much easier to just put on that blank face and kind of, and let's see, I know I'm kind of scrambling around. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's okay. Take your time.
Yeah, I lost it. Sorry.
Okay. That's all right.
That's all right.
It's all right. It is hard to start showing emotions or feeling emotions around other people. And at the same time, setting some boundaries makes it a little bit hard to do in vivo, right? Or in the space in which you live and work, right? Because it changes the dynamic.
I was always known as a people pleaser. I think that's what I was going to remember. And so I was always known as a people pleaser. So I would do what everyone else needed me to do. So even just yesterday, setting boundaries felt uncomfortable, but then it felt really good. You know, I felt really proud.
And we're proud of you too. So
yeah, that's kind of a big step.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
That makes me curious too, though. You know, sometimes it's easy to do a thing that's a little uncomfortable when you know there's a reward waiting on the other side of it. But sometimes it feels more like a crapshoot because you don't really know if there's a reward on the other side of it. So what has that part of it been like for you?
Very true. I think it depends on the person I'm setting the boundary with. I have a more difficult time with other people whose relationship is not healthy to begin with. And I think relationships that have continued throughout childhood are more difficult for me to set boundaries in. Because I think I do go back to feeling like I did as a child, much more easy.
Yeah, those childhood relationships are much harder to change the dynamic. The stakes feel higher as well because they are our grounding, our rooting, sort of our family and the people that we grow up with. They are our sort of tether in the world sometimes, and it's hard to. It risks a lot. Plus, it also takes a lot of energy and focus and awareness of those dynamics and ways in which to change them without, becoming overly grumpy, right? We want to use that anger and those other emotions, but in an appropriate way, in a healthy way for not just ourselves, but also for the people around us. the definition, the differences between kindness and niceness, which is probably something we should talk about some other time.
That's a topic worthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think
that is a recent lesson of mine.
the difference between kindness and niceness.
Absolutely. I'm trying to pass along that message to other people.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I remember when I first learned it, it was like eye-opening. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
It's like a line you didn't know needed to be drawn.
Right. But I can be very kind, and that is a big core value of mine, but I don't have to be nice or agreeable. So that's nice. Yes. Sorry. Okay. I do want to.
So that's kind.
That's kind. Yeah. So now that I've made a pun and a dad joke, I'm wondering also about, I don't want to not talk about the dissociation and what that looks like for you, how you deal with it, and how it's impacted your life at times. So what does that look like for you, that dissociation?
From a daily standpoint, it depends on, I think, a lot on my location. It's so easy to just zone out in front of the TV and things like that. And typically I feel pretty grounded at work, which I'm really thankful for. But there have been those really hard months where I don't remember the majority of a rotation, because I was in such a depressive state. And of course it gets worse with that. And I think that's where I have to come back to remembering to being in the moment, and just first step is just recognizing when that happens, and then not being ashamed of it as well.
Right. Yeah, there's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm wondering about, to Jeremy's question earlier, they talk about what, but not about how. So when you catch yourself dissociating, what are some specific things that you do in order to bring yourself back to that moment?
So that's something I'm still working on. I think I have 2 dogs. So spending time petting them, getting that comfort from them is really nice. I think going for walks also, I've started to do that more and more. Recognizing that I need to spend time with solid friendships to help talk out things that are going on, and just feel like I have support and a supportive community around me. I think that's helping me be more present, actually.
It's funny. I just read an article this week, and I know I read lots of articles, but this one was done, it was a study done in 2016, and it said that isolation is as dangerous to our bodies, as damaging to our bodies as smoking, that it damages our hearts and our lungs and everything else as if we were smoking, which was a very interesting study. Because MJ, you mentioned that, you've been intentional about relationships and talking them through, and many people have experienced childhood trauma, do isolate, and people aren't safe, and so they don't have a lot of relationships. And this is one way that trauma impacts our bodies later on, physically, that if we don't develop those intentional relationships that are intimate and close, then it takes a toll on our actual bodies. We are creatures, beings that need other beings of the same. We need other humans. So, and
there's even a couple of, and I'd like to know just what thoughts this stirs up in you, MJ, in general. I don't know if this is going to be a pointed question, but one thing that I do see come up a lot, it's almost of necessity that we make connections and form community when we're in high school, or maybe when we're in college. The further you get after college, there's fewer and fewer things that are designed to help adults form meaningful community. And then even if you have, I don't know, let's say you meet with people for bowling or whatever it is you do, you might be joined by a hobby, and that's not necessarily a deeply connected, supportive community that talks about what's really going on in each other's life. In fact, as a culture, we've sort of learned to avoid being a downer. So I am curious what that part of the process has looked like for you, because you described having a supportive community. And I wonder if that took a lot of steps to come out of isolation to get what you have now.
So I'm one of those people who I may not have a lot of friendships. The friendships that I do have are stronger. And so I'm thankful that I've had one childhood friendship, and here recently that has blossomed into reconnecting with old high school friends. And so that's been really nice. I'm actually seeing them again here soon. And so I have those types of relationships, the childhood friendships, which are really nice because I understand what it's like to grow up in the area that I'm from and what we went through together and things like that. But then I also have my adult relationships, and those relationships have to be a lot more intentional, because as an adult, finding those empathetic people who understand what you might be experiencing and who want to help you grow, that's much more difficult, I think, as an adult, to form relationships like that or find those types of people. And so thankfully through work, I have found a few, but they're rare for me.
And you have to be intentional to be brave enough to be vulnerable with those relationships, which is hard for everyone, but even harder if you've experienced relational trauma as a child. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. But vulnerability, like Brene Brown says, it's the bridge to relationship. You have to have that vulnerability. So it sounds like you've been very intentional about being open about your life and looking for that support from others.
No, it's kind of funny. I was just listening to Brene Brown talk about the hero's journey, you know, the way that every story is set up. And she made a very good point. I like how direct she was about this, because I hadn't made the connection before. She was saying the whole second act of any story you can look at is the hero trying to solve the problem without entering vulnerability. And we don't see the real magic or the real breakthrough happen until you embrace that.
Right, because that is the human experience. So MJ, I wonder, I'm going back to the dissociation for just a moment. I'm wondering about some of the typical sort of counseling things that excuse me, I'm sorry. Some of the typical counseling things that we do, we being therapists do, such as body scans and things like that. Have you found any of those to be helpful as well?
I'm going to be honest, I have a hard time remembering those in the moment. So yeah, I guess I don't know.
Well, I think that most people do have a hard time remembering those in the moment until they sort of become muscle memory. And that's hard to do when you're trying to be aware that you're dissociating and trying to manage it in the moment. So, you know, helping clients find their strengths in that they naturally already possess or that they can enhance, like pets and taking walks and things, can sometimes be more effective, at least at the beginning of treatment, than all of these other, you know, body scans and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and count all the color of one color that you see in your room or something like that. It's hard to remember all of those when you're dissociated and you're not in your left brain. So that was sort of not really a trick question, but kind of. I think your answer was honest, and it was, I think, most people's experience as they're going through their trauma recovery journey. Are there other ways, MJ? Oh, go ahead. You look like you were going to say something.
Well, yeah. So going back to the whole relationship idea, there's that stereotype of a giver versus a taker. And I think maybe dispelling that, like the whole idea that you're a giver. And I think that that's actually trauma, you know, that you're trying to I'm not sure of a good way to phrase it.
Could we say trying to be a source instead of a being that also has needs?
Yeah.
Is that part of it?
Because yes, that feels wrong. To have your own personal needs feels wrong because you are not allowed.
Yeah, a lot of times with the trauma, especially, well, always the trauma that if it's interpersonal trauma, I mean, not like a car accident, but if there's an interpersonal trauma, it's almost always someone taking whatever from someone else that person didn't want to give. It can be ego, it can be servitude, it can be sexual favors, it can be taking them and using them as a source or supply in order to feed the abuser. And you're right, MJ, it can feel very much like you're taking and you feel like you're becoming the abuser, except that relationships are this give and take kind of back and forth. What's missing in those abusive relationships is that balance, that not that relationships are transactional, but that reciprocation.
Yeah, when they stop being reciprocal, they stop being relationships.
Right. And so as we develop our relationships, it's around what am I willing to give? But then if I'm willing to give love and care and support and encouragement, then for it to be a relationship, then those are the same things that I should be able to expect back.
Otherwise, human resources become consumables.
Right. And that's back to so many of people who've experienced trauma feel like they were just a resource or just a thing that their personhood wasn't respected. So yeah, it takes a lot of courage to do that and to step through that give and take. Yeah, that's actually a really good point, MJ. It is. Well, I know we're getting close to the end of our episode. You have a chance and a forum to say anything that you'd like to say to other people struggling with trauma or childhood trauma. Is there anything that you'd like to say to them?
I think recognizing that this is a long journey and, there is an end to it. I don't think I've ever recognized that before or seen this as something that I don't have to live with forever. But it takes time. And I think having more and more people step out and discuss that they're in therapy and that they've experienced traumatic things, I think that it just shows courage and inspiration for other people.
I agree. One of the things I say a lot is that trauma is not a lifelong sentence. It doesn't have to be. I mean, there are always going to be a few impacts here and there, but we all have things to deal with in life. But we can have a normal, healthy, happy life, even if we've experienced extreme trauma. But you're right, MJ, it's a long journey. And sometimes it doesn't seem fair.
It's work.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's a work. That's all I was saying.
Yeah, it is a work. And it doesn't seem fair that we have to do the work. It's not our fault. But, it's one of those things that radical acceptance helps with. It is what it is. It happened. We can't change it. And so, we do the work, right?
I would like to ask you one more thing, MJ, regarding your experience with dissociation. And this is partly for the sake of maybe young people who are experiencing dissociation, but also for the sake of whoever's taking care of them.
Mm.
Because I've worked with kids, for instance, who have panic attacks, maybe regularly, but they're not always even recognizable to the onlooker.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if there's anything that you would want to say, maybe to help concerned parents detect this when it's going on, but it's not obvious.
You really have to know the person, and you have to be able to recognize those subtle changes, because I do think they are subtle, especially if they frequently, because then they just might look like they're the normal self. So I think being able to have an open person and letting that person know that there's no shame behind this, and that you're just trying to help them and you want to be there for them. And I think maybe talking to them about what their love languages are would be a good idea, to see what they feel like they need and what they're missing.
Yeah, those are good points.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Very good.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, MJ, thank you so much for coming on Safe Inside. Takes a lot. I know I keep saying it, but it takes so much courage to come on. So thank you.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, hopefully you'll come back another time and tell us how you're progressing.
Okay,
Yes.
that would be great.
Good, good.
Yeah, we're happy to have you on this. What do you think we want to lean into next time?
Well, I think we're going to go into, I think we're having another guest next time. And this guest is going to talk about her struggles around sexual trauma and what that's looked like in her life. So yes.
Okay.
Another guest. We like guests.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
All right.
great.
Join us then.